Welcome to the Mobile Monger Podcast, where we go behind the scenes in the cheese world to chat with people making, selling, or distributing your favorite specialty food products. I'm your host, Janae Muha, certified cheese professional, longtime cheesemonger, and producer advocate. Folia Farms was one of my introductions to small, farmstead, and sustainable farms when I was coming of age in the cheese world. Gianaclis and Vern Caldwell created a distinct floor plan for what small goat dairying could be, and while their commercial operation may have ended, her teachings have continued in the numerous books she has written around holistic goat care. This episode checks in with Gianaclis to find out how retirement from cheesemaking is going and what's been keeping her busy these days.
So I'm Gianaclis Caldwell, and I've been a cheesemaker for some time now, and we ran a commercial dairy for about 10 years, and actually longer than that, but made the cheese for about 10 years. And then life kind of, as life will do, got in the way of those plans, and we had to shift gears a bit. And so still milking a couple goats, and we have our farm, but it's not a cheese production facility active anymore. I got into cheese, grew up milking cows. I made yogurt since I was a little kid. I'm part Greek, so it was always drained yogurt, although we never called it Greek yogurt. It's just how you did it. And my mom tried making cheese when I was younger. And luckily, and I'm saying that because for her life, it didn't turn out, probably blew from what we call coliforms, not what are coliforms. Because otherwise my dad would have insisted she start doing that in addition to all the other things she was doing. So bacteria saved her. So I started making cheese more seriously in the early 2000s when we got our first goats. And I was new to goats at the time, but knew we'd have more milk than we could just drink or make into yogurt. And enjoyed the process so much. If you like things that are challenging, and changeable and not going to be the same all the time, cheese making is really good for that. And then I have a family of cheese eaters, and I love cheese too, but these are the people, that are always when you're grating it, are always reaching in and taking it and irritating you. But turns out that's a good thing to have if you want to be a professional. Yeah, so then I got Ricky Carroll's book, which most of us is what we started with, and still people to this day, it's a great book to start with. Of course, one of mine I also recommend, and I just adored it. So then we were getting close to Vern, my husband, retiring from the Marine Corps, and knew we had this piece of family land in Southern Oregon that we could move back to. And thought, well, what could we do that we could all live there and work? And it was right about the time you were hearing so much about small farmstead creameries. And we did what probably more people than will admit do, which is to think, oh, it sounds so romantic and idyllic. And parts of it definitely were. But for example, when we moved back up here, we had, I think, 6 horses, and I rode and trained and used to show, and I was doing printmaking and fine art printmaking, and I just thought we could keep doing all of that, but nope. So that's the summary in a nutshell, big nutshell.
What year did you start making cheese?
Commercially, we got licensed in 2006.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my start in cheese kind of started in 2002, but I moved back to Portland in like 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And I worked at the downtown Whole Foods, and I just remember hearing about Folia Farms for so long.
Yeah, we kind of started together, huh?
Yeah. But we couldn't really get your guys' cheese because it was pretty, where did you sell to?
Well, at our peak, we only made about 2,000 pounds a year. So, very small. And when we started out, most of it did go distance. Steve Jones, cheese bar and Steve's Cheese originally, he took a good chunk. Pastoral in Chicago, and then Max McCallum's cheese shop, I can't even remember, artisanal or something in New York. So it went to those three places. And then as the local palate here in Southern Oregon improved, so to speak, more and more of it, we could bring it in closer to not have to go quite as far and have that carbon footprint added to the product, which was always, we are off the power grid and we never use plastic packaging. We were trying to do our best to not be part of that. Now, of course, most cheesemakers have to because of food safety, and it's tricky being commercial and trying to keep your standards, some of the standards, because you have to meet those other needs.
Yeah, I think especially with like the Food Modernization Act has kind of changed. I think in the early 2000s, and you could probably speak to this, like it was a bit easier to kind of get up and running than it is now.
Yeah,
maybe.
it actually hasn't changed at all for somebody our scale, at least not noticeably, except for in insurance costs. But just the reality of if you're going to have a product that's going to distribution, which we never did. So if you're going to be a little larger than us, so make a few more pounds and a ton a year, you're going to probably need a distributor, and that means storage and multiple hands handling it. So it becomes more and more difficult to you want the food to stay in good shape. And and it depends on the product too. We made hard aged cheeses, which are so easy to transport. They don't have to be at fridge temps even, truly. And so it was just easier to wrap it in paper. But if we'd done soft, fresh cheeses or things that were wet, that's not going to be a possibility.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk me through like what you said, hard aged cheeses, raw milk, goat,
Yes.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Kind of what styles were you going for?
Oh, so I am a big believer. And when I teach cheese making, I say, pick the species you like, pick the breed you like to work with. Then you start making all sorts of different cheeses and see what your terroir, including not just what the animals are eating, but what might come into the process during aging. And it does. There are external forces, microbial and fungus, and all those things are microbes, of course, but affecting it. So I very much felt like that was the art side of it. You've got the technical and the science, which I adore, but I'm a former artist too, or still in some ways. And you want to see what can nature, instead of fighting it, what will this milk make? So because Nigerian dwarfs, which is a breed we milked, or still milk, their milk is very much like sheep's milk, which I learned from taking a class where we worked with sheep's milk and goat. And I don't have goat milk. And so that person, that cheesemaker, he taught me how to work a little bit differently with it and treat it more like sheep's milk. So you're cutting the curd differently and dealing with that huge yield in the vat differently, because it's harder to stir because there's so little whey comparatively. So I then started going more in the direction of sheep's milk base recipes. But of course, you can do any recipe with any milk. You're just going to have to modify it. And you even have to do that with the same species year round, because it's just going to change. And that's kind of what's fun if you like to keep, on your toes thinking. But, people who like goats pretty much already like that, because goats do that to you anyway.
Definitely. Goats are fun.
Yeah, they're a challenge.
So I'm really interested in this whole idea of like the Nigerian goat milk being more like sheep milk. So is it more like a higher fat content, more protein?
Higher fat, higher protein, very high in the right kind of protein for making cheese. So yeah, the yield on a hard cheese for us would be about 18%, which for cow and goat, it's going to be more like 11 and 12%. So, significantly more dense. And that doesn't mean it's a good commercial choice for a cheesemaker, because will your customer pay that difference in, you still have 4 hooves to trim for maybe half the milk, and, trouble with everything, it's a lot, it's different. So typically people will integrate some Nigerians into the herd now, if they're going to be a little more profitable, or crosses, which I adored. We did some crossbreeding with La Mancha, which is the short-eared goat. toward the end, and I really like those for cheese milk. Kind of got the best of both worlds. So it always depends when I'm consulting with folks, which I still do actively for business, their business side of it, and setting up floor plans. You look at what are your financial needs going to be? Do you have the luxury of making products that you want to, or milking breeds that you want to, versus what's going to actually pay the bills? And you might have that luxury. So, if you're embracing this as a lifestyle choice and a business you want to pay for itself and hopefully a little bit more, but you can make different choices than if you're trying to, pay a loan on the property or the equipment. And I don't know of many putting any aside for college for their kids. So.
Yeah, that's the rub, is people always think like, oh, I spend so much money on cheese at the store, but the cheesemakers aren't the ones getting it. They're not.
Yeah. When I teach a class that's to consumers, that usually is one of their takeaways, both through what I'm saying and their experience, is that so much more goes into it than they ever realized. And if they can just find it in their budget to pay a little bit more, maybe eat a little bit less, they're going to help animals and help the planet and help farmers. Absolutely. and their taste buds.
Yeah. I always recommended that from behind the counter too. Like, I would much prefer people spend a little bit more money on like a really robust cheese that they're going to really enjoy and they savor, versus the like 2 pounds of whatever for cheap.
And you still want that cheese too, stuff to put on the pizza where the flavors might get drowned out by garlic and nachos, and we all need those cheeses as well, but set some aside for just eating on their own.
Right. That balance.
Yeah.
So you quit making cheese commercially how long ago now?
We stopped making Filia Farm aged cheeses in 2016. And then for a couple more years, we made a product called Cheeserizo, which is coming back into market thanks to Sean Fells, who owns Portland Creamery. And I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but that was a cooking cheese. And we used cow's milk we brought in for that. And, like I said, life stuff we're caring for elderly parents now and just can't do it all for some reason.
Yeah. Well, I feel like even during your time making cheese, you still did a lot. So you've written a few books.
Yep.
You want to talk about those?
I would love to. I have 6 books out in nonfiction, and they're all on either cheese making, dairy topics, holistic goat care. And they were all things that were ways, really excuses for me to take time and study, and then try to organize what I learned and compiled. And I'm a good organizer and a good regurgitator. And not being a PhD myself, I wanted to understand what were in those books that were written for that higher level of academia, and then be able to share it, because it's so enlightening to what you're doing. So I'd always wanted to write fiction, and there wasn't time to really do that without feeling as though you were then requiring somebody else in the family to do your other work. And I just can't do that. So now that we're done, now I'm working on my fiction. So
now it's time for the fun stuff.
Yes, the fun stuff for sure. And the other was fun too. But it definitely, it got us connected to people like you and so many great people in the food world. We would never trade any of the things we did for that, not having that.
And I think it really positioned you as almost an expert in the holistic goat care world, because you get to travel around and do consultations and you do speaking engagements and stuff too, right?
Yes. And fortunately, there are so many people out there. There are many people that came before me, Pat Colby, as far as the natural goat world people that were my mentors. So we all have a cadre, hopefully, of mentors. And then as you learn, you share with others. And that's just really how it should be. And the food world was so amenable to that, as far as most people don't feel like they have, it's all top secret. And you can't teach somebody else. I always tell there's always you can always teach somebody something. Even if you only had one cheese making class, you could share that. And by teaching, you learn. I mean, there's nothing that demands more challenge to your own knowledge base than teaching. And so in a way, it's a way for me to be challenged and, try to keep the gray matter working.
I was just having a conversation with someone who is trying to kind of figure out what their next steps are in the world of cheese, and
they cheese maker or
just they're just so I'm doing a sensory evaluation class.
Okay.
I'm teaching assistant for it.
Nice.
So we're dealing with people who may or may not get into the cheese world, but they're interested in it. And so somebody was asking like, oh, well, should I, get behind the counter? Like, should I go work part-time behind the counter?
Right.
And I was totally like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have learned more from working behind the counter because you just have no idea what somebody's going to ask you. And my knowledge of specialty foods has just grown immensely because of the random questions that people ask.
Yeah, way more than I do in that regard. And it is almost limitless on what you can and also what you can forget.
Well, there's that too. Too.
Yeah.
But I think that happens a lot it's not necessarily a teaching role, but it kind of is because you are in a position
totally
of like, you know more than the consumer. So you're still kind of in that power dynamic of
you're guiding them toward their own experience with cheese, and that's invaluable. And nobody loves a good cheesemonger more than a cheesemaker. So let's say Steve Jones was he was just there for the cheesemakers as far as how he represented our products. And good job for you. I mean, good job, you.
Well, it's just such a fun, it's an aspect I don't think that people realize from behind the counter that you're going to learn a ton. But I think that happens too when you do any sort of classes, because you just have no idea what's going to bubble up in someone's head.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've been in classes too, where you can tell the instructor doesn't know and they're make something up. And I despise that. I think humility is important to maintain as far as, that's a good question. I don't know. And I can try to find out.
Yeah.
It's the other is just, I just can't stand that. And you see it or people tell them the wrong thing. And then you are dealing with misinformation. Of course, all of us have errors like that in our knowledge base, but be ready to have it pointed out.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I much prefer someone who says, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. I look at that as you actually know what you're talking about then. You're willing to admit that.
It's way more validating. Cheese has come a long way. And, we got into ACS, our first American Cheese Society conference was in 2005. And the world of the cheese people just was so welcoming. And many of those people have moved on now as well. And that's something that you see, and it makes you feel a little less alone. Many of them, of course, grew and sold and made a bigger splash than we did. And it's been such an honor to be, friends still with all those people. And many of them helped me with my books, as far as both interviews and profiles and readers too, people to read and tell you where you're wrong before it gets put in print. So it's been fantastic.
I guess the succession planning is something that I kind of wanted to touch on, because a lot of people have either felt like the only option was to sell to somebody bigger. So how did you guys kind of play out those options for what you were doing?
That was really never, our business wasn't a model that would have moved to another owner very well. Typically small farmstead cheesemakers, it'll be on your own property. And unless you're ready to give that up and move, it's not going to continue as that same business. And, so that was a choice we made initially. Of course, at the time, we thought that our youngest daughter, Amelia, who's now currently running a cheese shop in Grants Pass, Oregon, we thought she was going to take it over. So there had been that hope. And And when it became obvious that her life was going in a different direction, that had to change. But yeah, and it's really actually wonderful if you can sell, because that probably means you have employees, and that sale means that they usually get to keep their jobs. So I think building that sort of a business is wonderful. It just was never a model. I'm a good teacher, but I'm not comfortable being a manager or that sort of thing. So I don't enjoy that. So it would have taken the pleasure out of it. I'd rather just do it myself kind of person.
Right.
Yeah, which is kind of stubborn, really, and
maybe a little perfectionism in there too.
Oh, I touch. Yeah, if you ask my children, you'll get a big earful on that. And probably all the woofers we had. We used woof worldwide opportunities on organic farms for many of our interns. We just have one or two at a time. And I know I was a challenge for some of them, and they taught me a lot, and trying to calm down. But that's why writing is a great career, because it pretty much all is on you. And particularly now that switching to fiction, with nonfiction, you usually get your contract before you wrote the book. And that means you have a deadline, which there's nothing better than a deadline for getting you going. With fiction, you have to have a very polished manuscript before you ever start looking for your agent or anything. And that means several years of self-driven work. And so for people like me that are a little on that side, it's a good job.
Well, I'm glad to hear that's working out for you, because I need a deadline. Well, otherwise, I'm like, yes. That's not going to happen.
And I'll still do better with a deadline. But now as I'm 60, I do have a deadline, it's the real one coming. We all have that. We don't know when it is, but it just becomes way more apparent that you're going to run out of active, really ambitious years. And so that is definitely a deadline.
Got to get it done now.
I'm sure that's been a Stephen King title somewhere, huh? Deadline.
If not, it should be.
Yes. If I wrote in that genre, I'd write it down right now.
So I've had the fortunate ability to come and visit the farm.
Yeah.
I would love you to just kind of tell people about what you and Vern have built out there and how amazing of a place it is.
Oh, well, thanks. But so we're on 24 acres of a couple hundred that my parents started buying in the 1940s. This is was the land of the Takelma people, the indigenous folks from around here, and there are very few, if any, of them left. So I carry that with me as an awareness. So I got this 24 back, and there was nothing on it. So we decided to be off the power grid, even though there's electricity on either side of us. It was just a lifestyle choice that we made together, and built the farm. Currently now it's still beautiful, and there's a big barn, and we have an Airbnb that we've had for many years. So if people want to come visit the farm, that's still an availability. This year, without having baby goats to draw people in, we've noticed a real drop in attendance, though. So hopefully that'll change. But yeah, so now we run that, and caring for this property, as well as my in-laws and my mother's property, and doing that. And still have classes here at the farm, just mostly the once a year farmstead cheesemaker short course. So it's a 3-day intensive, pretty deep dive into the science and art of the product, or making cheeses, and keep that very small. But it's one of those good challenges for me. Not doing any traveling anymore because of caring for the parents, and COVID was kind of made that an easy cut, because everything stopped, of course. And so it made it where I could then shift to fiction without letting people down, because we weren't allowed to go anywhere anyway. So
there's definitely been some pluses along with the minuses of COVID.
Yes. And it's important to remember that.
I'm also glad to hear that Vern is keeping busy at a couple of properties he's got to take care of too.
Yeah, and hopefully he's having some fun with that too, not just all the responsibility. But we're doing some camping now, which we both adore. So we're finding ways to just go out for a couple nights fairly close, so that if we need to get back to take care of a health emergency, we can do it. But that's fun. So
Good. I'm glad to hear you're taking some
Yes.
time. Good.
Thanks.
So you're going to continue writing books. Like, what's next for Gianaclis?
Well, hopefully Gianaclis will get an agent soon, because without an agent going forward in fiction, unless you want to self-publish, is really not a thing. And I'm getting closer. It's a process, learning the craft of fiction, completely different from nonfiction, and a really fun challenge. I wish I'd started much sooner, other than when I messed around in my 20s with writing a novel. But I'm really enjoying it, and I just finished a second manuscript that I'll now start that whole revision process for, while I continue to work on trying to get representation. But yeah, I just want to keep doing that. I have another one after that I'm determined to write. So hopefully that will become a second career, and yeah, keep up with my little goaties as they age. Yeah, now we're just an old goat farm, really, and we're the lead old goats. Yeah, and I'm still going to do some ACS stuff, going up there this time too, and it'll be in Portland, as you know, and help out with some things. And yeah, we're trying to go with the flow.
Might as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a few questions that I always ask at the end of these. Well, I'm like, I always say that they're easy, but they're not, because they're kind of on the spot. But I'm sure you'll do great. So the first one, what is your current cheese crush?
Oh gosh, I love so many cheeses. I really, it's like asking favorite color. I really can't be honest and have one, because it just depends on what you're eating and
that's why I said current.
Well, this morning I had some Greek feta. I don't really have a crush. I'm polyfromageous. Polyamorous cheese lover.
That's fair. You know what? I usually have a hard time, but there's usually some cheese that I have that I'm like,
what's yours?
Oh boy. Well, no, I was just thinking about, I have a ridiculous amount of cheese in my refrigerator right now. But I did just take down an entire 8-ounce ball of Oaxaca from Don Froylan in like no time at all. And it wasn't just...
I almost brought up Don Froylan, because Francisca's and Lisa's cheeses, there isn't a single one of them that isn't perfect. And I'm glad that they're getting out into more markets, because they're like the cheese people should be just getting regularly. Yeah, no, totally agree with that.
Yeah, I took one down.
Yeah, I finished
off a couple days.
Yesterday.
No problem whatsoever. And then we used the queso botanero, and we made a Mexican lasagna.
That's probably almost my favorite, more than the Oaxaca. I love those little peppers and the cilantro.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep.
All right, next one. Your favorite cheese pairing?
I mean, again, depends on what I'm having. I mean, some bourbons are so good with some cheeses, and we don't go out specifically when we're shopping to look for a certain cheese. Usually it's what's there, what's on sale, what needs to be moved, and because we like so many, and there's something that will go with all of them and be really good. I don't eat wheat, so I don't do the crackery things. So I'm usually just like, even if it's a fresh cheese, fingers and and that.
I often think that people rely too much on the vehicle and not the cheese itself.
Completely, yeah, it can mess it up too. But of course, blues with ports and things, and even with bourbon and stuff. I don't do much sugar, so but that's always so good. And of course, being down here by Road Creamery.
You're in flux with all of that, definitely.
Yes. Yeah. All right, next one. I'll see if
All
I
right.
can get
The last one, and I feel like you will be able to kind of come up with a definitive answer for this one.
Oh, good. I'll get
hopefully.
a C then.
Your top food memory. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific meal. It could just be like a place that you really enjoyed being around the people and with food. And
Well, yeah, first thing that came to mind was just when I was really little, we used to buy raw honey by the gallon, and then we would have the Greek style yogurt and just scraping those honey crystals off and dipping the yogurt up, in a little bit of yogurt, and so you scrape off the crystals in your mouth. That's still, I mean, if I eat honey and yogurt now, it's that same moment of just joy. So that's always really good. And some of the chefs we've gotten to dine with have been amazing memories too. But I would still go to that yogurt and honey, because it's as pure pretty much of two products as you can get. And I would take big bowls. My mom said she used to have to stop me because my stomach would just get bloated with yogurt. Great picture there, bloated baby.
It was pretty idyllic. I had this whole idea of like the sun coming behind you as you're like taking these spoonfuls, and then a bloated baby tummy. So. But that answer also feeds into your favorite cheese pairing.
Oh yeah.
You answered the question. You answered both of them in one. So
okay. But see, I don't consider yogurt a cheese.
Yeah.
I know it crosses the border when it's drained, but
I'll still count it, even though it's not
good
cheese.
Yeah, I make a lot of paneer now.
Okay.
It's just with what little milk we have, it's just the go-to for a vegetarian, and just so versatile with everything. So paneer is pretty great too. I like fancy, but just plain everyday things that you can eat and gain a lot of nutrition from, and is really the foundation.
I'm a big proponent of the fresh, simple cheeses because they just are they're such a testament to the quality of the milk. And you can't have bad milk and have good fresh cheese. You just can't. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well said.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to touch on?
I don't think so, other than, encouraging people, which I'm sure you do all the time, to go to that farmer's market and talk to the cheesemaker. Oh, I know one thing I always like to say is never ask them what type of cheese it is. Ask them what style or how it was made, because it doesn't have to be a familiar name to be real cheese. And cheesemakers love a chance to teach and explain their process versus saying it's a cheddar, it's a Gouda, it's a mozzarella, whatever that we think we know.
Yeah, one day we'll be able to get people out of the very stringent boxes that they like to put cheese in.
They're pushing out.
Yeah.
But we can help them.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Gianaclis. I feel like I love touching base with you guys, and
come back down sometime, even though there are no baby goats.
I mean, you and Vern are, that's enough of a draw for me. So.
Aww.
And I'm excited. I'll get to see you in July for ACS.
Yes, that'll be fun.
Many things have changed since the early 2000s in the cheese world. People have come and gone, but this era of American artisan cheese began years prior, with people working so diligently to create something new. I'm grateful to have been in a time with Gianaclis and Vern's cheeses, and to know that their hard work lives on in the teachings and writings from those days on the farm. This podcast is recorded, produced, and edited by me, Janae Muha. Thank you to Ben Muha for allowing me to use your music. Follow along on my cheesy adventures at Instagram, Facebook, or get more content at Patreon. My website is also a great hub for all of my goings-on. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep spreading the word of good curd.